Hey everyone, thank you so much for joining another episode of the Black Surgeons podcast. Today we have a very special guest. If you have listened to any of the other podcasts, you probably know I've mentioned this name every now and then, especially when we talk about mentorship. And when you look at my story on why I ended up doing ENT, one of the big reasons is because of Dr. Charles Moore. And so I'm super excited and privileged to have him today on the podcast. I met Dr. Moore when I was a medical student, and how I met him was through volunteering in a community clinic. And I heard about his name. I didn't even know what ENT was. And I knew there was this amazing guy who was doing surgery, but also really cared about the community. And so I wanted to know more about him. And after shadowing him at Grady and learning more about ENT, I was like, wow, I didn't even know this field existed. And I fell in love with it. And so I would say Dr. Moore is a huge reason why I'm where I am today. And super, super excited to have him today to just learn more about his story and how he became the giant in our field that he is. Dr. Moore, thank you so much for taking the time today.
Oh, thanks, Ben, and thanks for your kind words. You were always a superstar. And I'm glad to be along for the ride.
You're too kind. So Dr. Moore is a chief of our department at Grady Memorial Hospital. He's an otolaryngologist. He also trained in craniofacial and skull-based surgery. But I'm not gonna do too much of an introduction. He has done so much in our community here in Atlanta. Um, he found a Heal Clinic center, and so we'll kind of learn more about what he has done over the years in his career. So, Dr. Moore, just to get started, I would like to know more about your upbringing. Where did you grow up, and what kind of inspired you to eventually go into a career in medicine?
Sure, sure. So I grew up in upstate New York, and a tiny little town is actually a hamlet called Nedra, New York. One street light. Sometimes I describe it to people as think of Mayberry, but with some black folks. That's where I grew up. So my parents who are still living and, wonderful people, age 94, 95. And then my cousins are a couple street over. My sisters, everybody is like a few streets within each other, from each other, or in the city of Syracuse, because Nedra's right outside of Syracuse. Just a really supportive environment for my parents. They decided at an early age for all of their kids that we would go to college and more, because they didn't have the opportunity to do that. And so, according to my parents, at the age of like 3, I said I wanted to be a doctor, and they were very indulgent. So things like my father, who used to work construction, is one of the things he did. Would like get a splinter in his finger during the day and keep it in there all day long so that I could practice operating to take it out when I got home from school and he got out home for work.
That's cool.
Or yeah, or my mother would, be reading the paper and let me bandage her leg with toilet paper to practice, um, as though I was setting someone's fracture, and hopefully getting it to heal appropriately. Um, but we didn't have anyone in my family that was a physician, and um, my mother in particular would always do things whenever I went to any doctor's appointment or anything, she always found a way to interject that I wanted to be a doctor, and often would create the situation where they would ask if I wanted to shadow with them even at an early age.
Wow.
So all of that played a big part of it, and my family's always been supportive of
Nice. So, where did you end up going to college and
it.
eventually medical school?
So I went to college at Union College in Schenectady, New York, and then medical school at Harvard, residency and fellowship at University of Michigan. And then right after that, I came down to Atlanta and became chief of service at Grady. And that's after my fellowship training that you discussed. I've been here now about 27 years.
It's amazing. How was your college and medical school experience back in the day, I guess, especially as
Mhm.
somebody who was trying to go into medicine? And I'm sure, I mean, the numbers today aren't that great as far as, just Black people in medicine. But how was that then, you trying to make that journey?
Sure. So Union College is, people would call it kind of a engineering and pre-med factory.
Mm,
And there is a large number of people that's what they focus on with the intent of going to medical school. There were less than 1% of people of color.
mm,
So even less than that were thus the group of us that were Black. But fortunately, the few of us that were there really stuck together really well and would help each other in any way that we can. And I found the same thing in medical school, that the Black students in particular would always work together, study together, um, do whatever it took to support each other, because there's very few of us there as well.
mm,
And I think it was a good place for the exposure and for the educational opportunities. Um, Things have changed drastically, I think, overall, that there are more people of color, but still not nearly enough.
mm.
And that's something that as we get more folks, that will only benefit not only the patients, but the folks going through the process.
Yeah. What was your experience like going to medical school in Harvard, and how did that kind of shape the career trajectory that you had, and like
Mhm.
essentially how did you end up choosing otolaryngology?
When I went through medical school, I went in with the attitude that I whatever rotations or whatever, all the basic science stuff, that's the basic science stuff, and I had always enjoyed that.
Mm,
The clinical rotations, I went in with the attitude that every rotation would have to prove to me that I could not do it.
mm,
Um, and, it's interesting in that it's unfortunate, rather, that sometimes the people that you come in contact with
mm,
will shape what you think you can do or are interested in. And that really just shouldn't be that way, because there are some areas that I just immediately lost interest in it because of the people or the person or the one person that presented themselves in such a way that I was like, I never want to be like this person. I never want to do what they do.
yeah,
They seem to be miserable at in everything that they do, and it's just not a good reflection of the field.
yeah. I feel like that's actually pretty key to, when I think about it. Just when you look at our field, there's subspecialties of it.
Hmm.
And sometimes as a medical student or anybody might not realize of how broad of a practice you can have. And so you can just look at a subset of people who practice maybe a certain part of ENT, and they can be really thrown off and they'd be like, oh man, I don't think I want to do
Right,
this field, and they can miss out on so much more of what we actually do. But
right.
so that's a
And I'll have to. I remember my first ENT rotation was horrible.
mm,
It was a 2 week rotation where we were assigned to different otolaryngologists at the different Harvard hospitals, and there was a group of 4 of us that were assigned to this one attending, and he would have 3 of us sit out in the waiting room while one of us came into the room with him with a patient, sat behind the patient in the corner. And he said, if I see something that's really interesting, I'll let you know, but otherwise just sit there. And so that was what the rotation was. So uh,
man,
we decided as a group that, all of us don't need to go there for that. So
yeah,
3 of us would go out to lunch or go and do other things, and one would be assigned for that day.
yeah,
But fortunately, I ran into some other folks who said, you really should give ENT a try. So
mm,
I did the month-long version, and it was
mm,
phenomenal. Was paired with someone who really loved to teach, loved his work, um, would do whatever he needed to do to support students, and
mm,
that's what really confirmed for me that ENT was the area for me. And also, with that second group of attendings, I could see myself more aligned with that.
Mm-hmm.
I love surgery. ENT still has enough medicine. It also has psychiatry, pediatrics, if you want it. It's really a wide variety of things that you can do, and
Yeah,
so that seemed to fit well with me and with my personality.
nice. And so now we're going into residency. How was that like during your time?
Mhm.
How was residency?
Yeah, that was also very different. When I
Mm,
was going through, there weren't any residency hours, or you stayed until it was done. So there was a period, and I was telling some people about this recently, where as a first year resident, one of our residents dropped out, and so the rest of us had to make up for that. So that meant that two of us were on call every other day in house for about 6 months. Right. So what that meant was, when I was on call, I was on call for 24 hours. The next day, didn't go home. We had a full day of work. And then I might get home around that day, maybe 8, 9, or whatever. Then have to get up in the morning at 5 or whatever, go back and be on call in house again. Did that for 6 months. My plants died. In my house. You get to a point where you're the two of us, we were just really just trying to survive. And, I'm sure I was clinically depressed. I really didn't see daylight for about 6 months, but I also knew that I went there for a purpose, and I needed to leave there with something. And so I needed to get through that process. And, there were a lot of, my family was always supportive throughout, although I didn't tell them all of this because worry. But there were people in the hospital that I became friends with. A lot of the folks that worked in the cafeteria and other places that would be really supportive, and so they would make sure that I had food to eat. They
Nice.
would make sure that I was doing okay, um, because in many ways we represented everybody there, because there were so few of us, so few people, so few Black residents, Black attendings, that they were really proud to see us there, and whatever they could do to make our time as successful as they could, they wanted
Mm,
to do.
nice. That's powerful. Um, so transitioning to fellowship, what made you do a fellowship? And did you feel like you needed it, or did you just feel like this was like an area of expertise that you needed more?
So, where I trained, we really got a ton of experience. And
Mm,
my fellowship training in anterior skull base and maxillofacial trauma and reconstruction was with Larry Marintet, and he's just a wonderful person. And again, I liked several areas, and I kind of aligned my personality with all the people there, and I was more closely aligned personality wise with Larry Marintet. I liked that type of surgery in particular.
mm,
He told me I didn't really need the fellowship training because we had such great experience, but it was more about getting the credential.
mm,
So I was his first fellow, and it was great for me because it allowed me to take, I think, the next step and become more of a teacher in a lot of ways. And the way our program worked, you're really a teacher all the way along, but you're assume full ownership of everything.
mm,
And it also gave me time to do some research, to write a lot of papers, and to do uh, to think really about what I wanted my future career to be like.
So speaking of the future career, you're done with fellowship. You get an opportunity down in here in Atlanta, Georgia. What made you come down in Atlanta? Because your family sounds like they're all up north.
Yeah, I never thought I would come to the South, ever,
Mm, mm,
honestly. My parents are both from the South, and they migrated up north.
mm,
And they'll come down to visit, but they don't plan to live here.
Mm.
And I grew up with that kind of that same mentality. But then when I was looking for jobs, this position at Emory was opening up and had a new chair, and my fellowship director, Larry Marantet, again said that this would be a great opportunity for me because it would allow me to do all the things that I wanted to do, the craniofacial work at Emory.
Mm.
And then also there's an opportunity to work at Grady. And I'd never worked in a facility quite like Grady. And I really always wanted that opportunity, but never had the opportunity to do that. So I thought, give it a try. Um, if I don't like it after a year or two, I can always switch. But,
Mhm.
things worked out. And so I've stayed.
27 years later.
Right.
And so to kind of make a little bit of a transition, you're settling down here at Emory and Grady, and some of your work that you started doing is kind of going into the community. Kind of, you ended up starting like almost a clinic outside of what you were doing every day. What inspired you to get out of your daily work and job to get out in the community and try to serve the underserved?
Sure. So, Grady is, to me, a really special place that does a lot of great work for folks that sometimes don't have the means to get quality health care in their community. It's a county hospital, and we see really people from all over the world. And from almost day one of my being here at Grady, um, I'd be in clinic and someone would come in with a very late stage head and neck cancer. And for about the first several months, almost every week, someone would come in needing an urgent airway. So needing an awake trach. Sometimes they would, someone would bring them into our clinic, kind of rush them in and have to just drop everything and run up to the OR, do a trach. And then many times, those patients, all that we could do is set them up for palliative care. And that kept happening. And, when I would then go on and do more of the same thing, go back to clinic, it would happen again. And each time that would happen, I think to myself, somebody should do something about this. But, then I'd go back to work and it would happen again. And I think, somebody should do something about this until one day I thought, well, maybe it should be me.
Mm.
And with that, I didn't know what I could do, but I thought, I need to do something. So I just got in my car, picked the top 3 zip codes from where my patients were coming from, and started driving out to those communities to see what was going on. Talking with folks, talking with people at the grocery store, at bus stops, not telling them who I was or what I was doing because I didn't really know what I was going to do or what I could do.
Yeah.
Um, but just trying to find out more how I could plug in. Now we kind of put that term on there, learning the social determinants of health, but that term didn't exist back then. And with that, again, I felt I still needed to do more. I mean, it's great to talk with folks, but I thought, well, I'm a head and neck cancer guy. Maybe I can do head and neck cancer talks on how to prevent head and neck cancer, that type of thing. And so I started going to churches, to fairs, setting up tables and grocery stores, talking to folks about it after work on the weekends, and saw that people were really receptive all throughout this. Folks were just glad. Honestly, I think they have someone who showed some concern, some level of care
Mhm.
for their being, for their condition. And so I did that for a while. I thought, well, I should be able to do more than this. So I bought some supplies, loaded the back of my car, and started driving out to those areas and focusing on non-traditional locations. So under bridges, I went to some crack houses and provided care. And let me explain the crack house,
Mm.
um, how that came into being.
Mm.
One of my patients at Grady,
Mm.
because by now, as I'm going around to different areas providing care, folks started to know where I was going to be, I would tell them in advance, and they would bring more and more folks there. And she came into um, clinic one day as a patient, and she said, "Hey, you're that doctor that tries to help people, right?" And I said, "Well, yeah, I think most doctors try to help people." She said, "No, you don't understand what I mean. You're that doctor that will go to places where people need care if they won't or can't come here." I said, "Well, yeah, no, I do." And she said, "Well, I have some folks that really need help and they will never come here. And I want you to pray about it because I want you to come to provide the care there." And so I did pray about it. I mean, um, I didn't feel that I could tell her no.
Mm.
So I went, and she did a phenomenal job in that. With any of those times that I went with her, there was never any drug activity going on. I was stepping over all kinds of things, but
Mm.
people were so appreciative of my coming to do whatever I did,
Mm.
uh, that I kept doing that for a while. And at that point, I was still doing the head and neck cancer screenings, but I saw all the medical issues that weren't being addressed. So I relearned some primary care, which, can be kind of frightening for an ENT that's, you know,
Yeah. Yep.
I figured I went to medical school. I did well in my medicine rotations. I can do some basic primary care.
Mm.
And so I did that. And then at that point, I really hadn't told a lot of people what I was doing because I made the mistake of telling the wrong person. And she was like, "Why are you going there? If those people needed help, they'd come to you." I'm like, "Yeah, you don't get it." I'm like,
Mhm.
"Okay, thanks." So I went for probably about a year or longer just on my own with people kind of knowing where I was going to go. And there were a lot of interesting stories that I had.
Mm.
But until one day I thought, if I had like-minded people that came along with me, I could make even more of an impact. Together, we could really change some things. So then I started telling more people and talking to folks like Vita Johnson, who's been phenomenal in Atlanta and nationally, and started school-based health centers all around the state and everywhere else. And she was really an inspiration to me. And I remember
Mm.
going and telling her, this is what I want to do. She's
Mm.
like, "You can absolutely do that."
Mm.
And I'll be happy to help you any way that I can and help talk me through some things. Um, so that grew from me to bringing a few people out to more traditional locations. So I focus more on the fairs and the churches and grocery stores with them. Went from the back of my car to a mobile unit. I'm laughing because the mobile unit, I wrote my first grant, poured my heart into it. It was something like, it was supposed to be like $300,000. Got the grant. 3 days before they're supposed to send me the check, they're like, "Charles, great news. We're not going to give you the money, but we have this mobile unit for you instead. And then you get a very small amount to help with some supplies." I'm like, "Well, I really appreciate all of this, but I think someone at this farther along could benefit more from the mobile unit, and we'd be
Mhm.
happy to be able to take the money." And they're like, "No, that's not how this is going to work.
Oh
You're going to
man.
keep this mobile unit." So, and that actually turned out to be a godsend, honestly, because
Mm.
it was this big, uh, is like kind of like a Greyhound bus kind of thing that
Mm.
would open up, and it gave us a really a larger space to provide care for folks, more of a fixed location. Often had a starburst picture on it, so you couldn't miss it. um, I would drive it sometimes. I didn't drive it well, and I did not like to drive it.
Mhm.
One of my nieces here, I remember asking her if she knew how to drive it, and she said, "Oh, no." I asked her if she could drive it, and she said, "Yeah, I can drive it." And so we were going somewhere across town, and because I really didn't want to drive it, she got in there. She was driving like 3 miles an hour.
Yeah.
Um, so she was driving it, and she was going about 3 miles an hour. Cars were honking and everything. And I got her to pull over. I said, "I thought you knew how to drive this." She said, "Well, no, you didn't ask me that. You asked me if I could drive it."
Mhm.
So she was just trying to help me. And there were so many people like that were just trying to help, would do whatever they could.
Yeah.
None of us had CDL licenses. We were just making
Yeah.
it work.
Yeah.
But so we went from that. Then I partnered with a community-based organization that was
Mm-hmm.
um, part of a church that I found out later was stealing money from us.
Wow.
Right. And that was really devastating. And how that came into being is one of the person who later joined our board came to me one day and said, "Hey, Charles, I'm just really surprised you never told me thank you." And I was like, "Thank you for what?" And he's like,
Mm-hmm.
"Well, I gave this organization um, a check for, I think it was like 15 or $20,000, and you never said thank you." I was like, "Well, it's because we never got the check."
Oh man.
Right. And so we were at that community-based organization, we were paying rent to them, but we were
Mm-hmm.
completely separate.
Mm.
And, who knows how many people, because there were others that they had told that we were part of them and to write the check to them, and they kept.
Wow.
So, I went to them and said, I think there's been some misunderstanding. There's sure we can work through. This is what has happened. And their CEO said, "Well, sure, let's talk it through. Let's come back tomorrow." I went back tomorrow and they said, "We want you out in 2 weeks." Now, this is a facility that really we built out, had all this equipment. It's almost impossible to move a full medical clinic. But by this time,
Mm.
we were providing pretty much comprehensive care, had a lot of different specialties coming from Emory and Piedmont to provide care there. Um, and I'll come back to how we were able to do that.
Mm.
So there's no way I could move all that stuff. And sometimes I still get a little emotional about this.
Yeah.
Uh, some of my good friends, one in particular, called folks in my church.
Mm.
People showed up that I hadn't seen for years,
Mm.
packed their cars, packed their trucks, put stuff on the roofs, and helped us move it to a new location.
Wow.
And so, right. And then was able, actually, it worked out really, honestly, better for us in many ways, because the space we moved to was a space that at the time Grady had, that they let us rent for really nothing. That
Mm.
was 4 times as large. It had a pharmacy within the building. It was right across from the bus and the train station. So it really was a godsend.
Mm.
But the process of getting to that,
Mm.
that's why I'm so gray now.
Yeah. I don't see any grays, man.
Kind, but one of the ophthalmologists that you've had on your show, you need to go and see them maybe. But I will point out one thing that was one thing that Georgia does is really great for folks that
Mm.
are interested in this, is that if you provide care free of charge, there is the Georgia Volunteers Act that they'll cover your medical liability. So that's how we were able to do a lot of this. And then as we grew, you're able to hire APPs and give them a full-time salary uh,
Mm.
and still be covered under that. And then later, we transitioned to becoming a federal qualified healthcare center.
I see. What was the transition between, you going from the back of your car or the mobile unit to a building? And I guess, can you walk me through, I guess, maybe from funding to you creating this organization,
Sure,
essentially?
sure. So initially, I paid for it out of my pocket.
Mm.
I mean, there's no way to get around it. My parents would always say, "Don't put all your money into this, because it's great to do that, but don't, because we know you, and you'll sink everything you own into this." And I'm like, "Well, it'll be okay."
Yeah.
Um, and so initially, I just put my own money into it because it's something I believed in. It's something that needed to be done. People needed access to care. I was in a position to do what I could do, and so I did it. And then I started writing the grant that I told you about. That was the first one.
Mm-hmm.
And then I met someone, Elizabeth Hornbuckle at Wellspring Resources,
Mm.
who just heard my story, believed in what we were doing, and she is a professional grant writer and has her own company, Wellspring Resources, and she just kind of came on, did everything pro bono, and started introducing me to people,
Wow.
helping me put things out of there, just because she believed in the work. And that, I tell her, I think she's really a big part of why we are where we are now.
Wow.
And then so we grew. We now have our primary location, primary care, pediatrics, behavioral health, HIV, and PrEP management, dental facilities. We have 2 school-based health clinics. We're opening up, those are all in Atlanta, really proper.
Mm-hmm.
We're opening up a new site in Douglasville
Nice.
that will be initially primary care and pediatrics, but dental would be coming there as well. So all that is just, the right people came at the right time. I learned how to write better grants,
Mm.
but it's really a skill that you need, that I feel different people have different skill sets. And so, reach out to them, let them use their talents to move things forward, and you'll be amazed at what can happen.
Mm. As far as you trying to balance things out, as you talked about, using your own resources, you having a clinic at Grady at the same time trying to run this nonprofit. Um, how are you able to balance those roles, I guess? And do you ever feel like you're overwhelmed with a lot of things that are going on? Because I know a lot of people, you have your work and you have other passions. Maybe you want to pursue something.
Mhm.
How are you able to kind of maintain that and maybe not burn yourself out?
Great questions. You're right. It's a lot. At one point, I remember finishing in the OR here at Grady, and
Mm,
then getting home around 10 or 11 at night and realizing that I hadn't done payroll for
mm,
folks. So people have to be paid. And so
yeah.
I was up, into the wee hours of the morning doing that, because, that's really not my talent. I'll make it happen, but that's not my focus. That's not really where my strengths are. And at that point, I realized we need to get more people that
Yeah.
really focus on that component. Um, I transitioned from being the CEO to bringing on a CEO, and then being more of the founder president role, so I can still go out and engage people, get folks involved, help create programming, but have somebody there who
Mm,
can carry out the day to day. Because, one of the things, and people tell me that it doesn't make any sense, but it makes sense to me. I
mm,
never wanted the work that I do at Healing Community Health to be dependent on making my salary. So I've
mm,
never taken anything. It's all
mm,
voluntary, because I figured I can work. So I have my day job at Grady and
mm,
Emory, and I have, do all the things there. And now I direct the Emory Urban Health Initiative, and so I've split my time between that. And then we now have a phenomenal team that is CEOs, COOs that manage everything, and then I can kind of come and go between all of it pretty seamlessly, I think. So it
mm.
allows me to do all of those things by having the right people in place, trusting that they will do their best and that they know what they're doing, and realizing that I can't control everything and I shouldn't want to. That people can contribute what their gifts and their talents are, and it will just make everything so much better.
What advice would you give to other doctors who are passionate about the community and they want to get involved in community-based healthcare initiatives? What kind of advice would you give it to them?
I think don't give up hope,
Mm,
because as we discussed initially, you will come in contact with the wrong people that will tell you that it can't be done, but it can be done. It's just that they've never seen it before, so they assume because they haven't seen it, it can't be done, but that doesn't mean that.
yeah.
That just means that you might be the one that needs to take that step out and to try it. To understand that there will be failures, but you can learn from those failures, and then you build upon that and go to the next step, and to reach out to the right people with the right skill set, knowing that you're not going to know everything, but that by bringing together people, you can learn from each other and make something that can really truly be phenomenal.
You talked a little bit about partnership. You know, was there any partnership between the institution that you work with, as far as like Emory or Grady, with the nonprofit that you work with, or other institutions, like as you talked about, churches and other organizations around Atlanta that kind of helped develop the clinic to where it is today?
Early on, there was kind of, I guess, a love-hate relationship with Emory and the work that I was doing. They were trying to, because they didn't know it really hadn't been done in this way before. And so they were concerned about their liability. But there was one person who was at Emory Midtown who said that, I can't give you money, but I can give you supplies. And we can help you do the work that you need to do by providing those supplies. And that's phenomenal. So, there are a lot of ways that people can help. And then Piedmont came on board, and they started sending their pulmonologists and their OBGYNs to come out and work for us, free of charge.
Wow.
So that we would do whatever care we needed on site. And if people needed more definitive care, they took them like for additional cardiology tests. They would have them go to Piedmont free of charge, do whatever procedures they needed, and then they would come back and have their long-term care at Healing Community Health. So those types of relationships really made a big difference. And then churches. As a federally qualified healthcare center, everything's on a sliding scale. So there were a number of people that didn't have access to care. The churches would help to advertise the types of things that they could get. And then sometimes they would give us a donation to help with that. So all of that helps. And then students from Emory, Morehouse, Georgia Tech, Mercer would come out. Communities would come out and help with health fairs, or to help set up, or when we did our food giveaways, they would all come out to do that. Our residents would come out with that for the food giveaways and for our weekend events. So everybody pitched in how they could.
Nice. So was there ever a time where you felt like, and like you almost questioned that the Heal community clinic would not succeed? And how did you kind of push those doubts? Because I know, as you said, there will be failures and push through them. But was there ever a time you kind of doubted that? And maybe can you give us an example of that time?
Sure, absolutely. There are several. But, fortunately, things have always continued to move forward. I knew we'd never, at least I won't say we'll never, but I knew in the initial stages that I wasn't trying to do any of this to make any money, but just to hopefully break even so that we could continue to provide care for folks who didn't have access to it. And one of those examples was when that church was stealing money from us. I didn't know what we were going to do. I mean, all within a period of 2 weeks, we had to find a new location to go, had to move all that equipment. We didn't really make any money. Big pieces of equipment, had to get that moved. So theoretically, I'd need movers, which weren't going to do that for free. So that was one of probably the biggest times. More recently, with all the federal changes that are going on, there have been, so as a federal qualified healthcare center, we get now a portion of, we get some funds from the government to help provide the care that we provide. It's not enough, but it does help. And with all the changes that have been going on, there have been, talk of holding up those funds. So everybody didn't know what was going to happen. And again, we're there to do the purpose of providing the care. So we're not one of the huge ones that will have all um, this funding to fall back on necessarily. But we can, manage effectively for a period of time. But if those funds go away, that's going to be a challenge. And how do you tell folks that that's how they make their livelihood? That they want to give back, they want to work in all kinds of communities, but they also have bills to pay.
Yeah.
And you'd have to let all of them know that this is going on. We don't know what's going to happen, but we're going to do our best to make sure that everything works out. So far, it has, but you just don't know.
Yeah. I guess along those lines of just kind of the impact of funding and the government,
Mhm.
based on your research and your experience over the years, what do you feel like has been the biggest barrier on achieving health equity? Just not just in head and neck cancer, but in other fields as well.
Um, you know, Honestly, people always say follow the money, and that's
Hmm.
really what it is. It's resources in communities.
Yeah.
If those resources are there, that helps folks get access. It increases the ability to provide strong educational opportunities for folks, which allows them to transition to other stages in life and other stations in life.
Mm.
And, right now, with the way that everything has been set up, and I know you know this, depending on where you're born, your zip code can decide whether or not you live.
Yeah.
Um, and that's wrong. And if resources were allocated appropriately throughout all of those communities, that would not be the case. And if
Hmm.
resources were given to the schools, if there were jobs that were available that were meaningful and of a decent salary that people could live off of, all that would be changed. All, in my mind, at least a lot of the inequities would be closer to being at a level playing field. There's always follow the money.
That's so true. So if you had to go back and give advice to yourself, maybe when you started your career 27 years ago, what would it be? What would be the advice?
Don't be afraid to take chances.
Mm.
You know, as we're talking, I may have made it seem like, oh, this and I did this and I did that and I did that.
Hmm.
But there was a lot of second guessing every step because I
Yeah.
didn't know what I was going to have to do. I didn't know what I could do, but I knew I needed to do something
Mm.
all along. And I think um, don't don't be afraid to take chances and don't be afraid to ask for help because sometimes, especially people of color, there's so
Mm.
few of us, we don't want to reach out to others. And it's great to get help from other folks of color, but sometimes some of my biggest advocates have been people that were white.
Hmm.
And whatever it takes to move things forward, it doesn't mean you're compromising anything,
Yeah.
but you're helping to move things forward. And that's, in my mind, that's the ultimate goal.
Nice. And so, what is next for Dr. Moore, and what is next for the Healing Community Center? What are some of the new initiatives that you guys are expecting and you're working on this coming years?
Sure. So, we have a really phenomenal CEO, Dr. Vernita Bacchus Curry, who we were fortunate to get from a really large FQHC in Chicago that has come, and she's has tremendous energy, tremendous managerial methods, and is just really a wonderful person. So, as I mentioned, we'll be expanding into Douglasville,
Hmm.
providing more care there, continuing to provide the care in Atlanta, looking to partner with additional organizations so that we can really make a strong network and provide the care that folks need, um, regardless of their ability to pay. For me personally, I have taken on as I mentioned, the director role at the Urban Health Initiative. And the goal of that is to connect academia to communities. And in my mind, meaning bring folks from behind those four walls out to the communities and the resources with them
Yeah.
to address issues that are important to the community and hopefully build sustainable solutions.
Yeah.
So I'll be doing more of that. And I've been doing a lot of work with violence prevention and working with folks that are really active in that space, like Dr. Randy Smith with the Ivy Project, but also bringing those same resources to the individuals in their communities for them themselves, but also for their families and for the community as a whole. Um, People ask me sometimes when I will retire. I don't know if that's what you're hinting at, but
No. I was not. I personally, I don't think I truly believe on retirement. I feel like, that's just a word where, I don't know. For me, it's like if you are passionate about something, you should keep doing it until you can't, right?
right,
So that's
right,
at least that's what I believe in. So I think
right,
for most of the American culture, at least, it's more of like, oh, like you want to do nothing after you're done working, quote unquote. But like, then what are you
yeah,
gonna do? Then life is gonna be boring. You're gonna just
right,
so
right.
uh,
I agree with you wholeheartedly. I'm sure I'll continue to evolve and to change, but I'll always be doing something.
yeah.
Um, I can't imagine the R word, the retirement word.
Yeah. I think we've talked a lot about community and the things that you have done on that aspect of things, but I feel like you have done so much even when it comes to just mentorship for medical students and residents who following your footsteps. um, I guess I wanted to ask you this question because I already know your answer, but I want you to kind of elaborate on it, just the importance of mentorship.
Sure.
I feel like if I didn't seek that out from you guys, from Dr. Oz,
Mhm,
I wouldn't have been where I am today. And so I really preach that to people that are
mhm,
coming before me. What
mhm.
do you think is our role as people who I guess you've been there, but I'm kind of heading there. But for medical students, how should they seek mentorship? And what do you think is the role for them and for us on that aspect?
Yeah, no, you're exactly right. I think mentorship is critically important, and um, don't be afraid to reach out to folks and kind of like what you did,
Yeah.
just step up because people like to talk about themselves,
Hmm.
and you can always phrase it that way if need be. But especially if you've never had anyone in your family or in your immediate circle that's in the area that you're interested in, often you won't have any idea of what to expect. And early on, I really didn't have any mentors. I really
Hmm.
didn't. I was just trying to figure it out. Often it seemed as though, in retrospect, I was probably afraid to approach people, thinking that they would either think less of me because I didn't already know, but there would be no way that I would know.
Hmm.
Um, or that somehow I should be able to figure who I needed to go to for a certain thing, but I didn't know that either. I think it's important that folks know that you need mentors for all types of things. You might have one mentor for a certain thing, but another mentor for something else. I think I may have mentioned to you once before, I have a mentee that's a Black woman geographer. Not that I know really anything about that.
Hmm.
But she reached out to me and we did some work together. We've gotten some publications and she utilizes me the best of I can't even tell you how well she utilizes
It's
me.
amazing.
But what she does, which is great, and I encourage other people to do that, is if you identify somebody that you want to be a mentor, approach them just like what you did. And then as she goes along at different stages periodically, she just reaches out to me, asks me how I'm doing, and keeps me apprised of where she is and what she's doing.
Hmm.
And at that point, later, because you kept that connection, it's easier if she needs recommendations, or if I see things that I think would be great opportunities for her, I send them to her. And there have been some things that I've had to talk her into doing,
Mm-hmm.
because in it, she'll tell you they were the best things that ever happened.
Yeah.
So, reach out to folks. And part of that is also you need sponsors, people
Yeah.
that will put your name in the hat, put your name at that table to say, I know this person and he or she can do it. And, I'll get you connected so that you can move forward.
Yeah. 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 Speaking of having different mentors, I remember even when I reached out to you, you were able to kind of like, oh, okay. I mean, I can help you to a certain extent, but you were able to be like, okay, you are interested on global health. You're interested in doing these things. Here are the people that I can, um, connect you with. And so I think you're right. That's super important.
Mhm.
Well, Dr. Moore, it's almost an hour. Don't want to take too much of your time, but it's been a pleasure. Just kind of hearing more about your story. I mean, I thought I knew a lot about your story, but there's some more details that just came out of this that were very inspiring and useful. So I appreciate you for taking the time.
Well, thank you for all you're doing, and this is a phenomenal way to let folks know what they can do, and potentially how to do it. Thanks.